Why can't people immigrate to the United States legally? My ancestors did.
So I'm really glad you brought this question up because this is a common question and a common thought I think that a lot of US voters have right now based on the news and the media and some misinformation, as well as their own personal histories and their own experiences with immigration. So a big part of the answer to your question is how the immigration laws in the United States have changed over the past century or so. So people like your parents or earlier generations coming to America faced a lot less restrictions and were often able to do so much more easily. And I'll get into the specific details a little bit later. But a big part of the answer to your question is that there's simply not a lot of pathways for people looking to come to the US legally right now. And another part of the answer to your question has to do with who is actually here in the United States and what immigrants in our country might look like. So I would say that immigrants make up a huge part of the US population, up to 13.7% roughly. Many of these people, about 77%, are in the US legally. I think back when maybe your ancestors and my ancestors and a lot of other people's ancestors were coming to the United States, they were coming to follow the American dream and create a better life for themselves, to seek new opportunity, to build something here. And often they were escaping situations in their home country. So that is not a specific reason anymore to come to the United States. Typically, when you're outside the United States looking to come in, you have to fall into one of a certain category. So you have family tie to the United States, like a spouse or a parent, child, maybe a sibling, but some sort of immediate relative. If you have an employment opportunity, a specific employment opportunity in the United States, meaning a job offer or a similar specific way to come to the United States through employment, that might be an option. Outside of that, there are limited visas for people who want to come here as tourists temporarily, who are not allowed to work. That would just be coming for maybe a conference or a vacation, and people that are coming to the US to pursue an education, who typically, again, are also not allowed to work here. There are a few other limited categories like refugees or other people that might fall into humanitarian exceptions to come to the United States. But those categories, especially now, are extremely limited. And to go into a little bit of what I was talking about in terms of the numerical restrictions on even these people that have different options to come to the US, every month the Department of State puts out what we call the Visa Bulletin. Okay, so let's walk through maybe a specific example that might help show what this actually means. So how old are you?
I am 25.
Are you married?
No.
You would be considered in this category here, an F1 as an unmarried son or daughter of a US citizen. So for people in this category, this means that your parents might be citizens, one or both, and they're trying to bring you to the United States. Mm-hmm. So our government is currently processing people that applied for this benefit in September of 2014. That means that if you wanted to come here through your parents as an adult unmarried citizen, generally you would be looking at least a 6-year wait in order to come here. And that's with a direct family relationship, which a lot of people don't even have when they want to come to the United States. If you are from another country that has a high level of immigration, such as China, India, or Mexico, the wait might be different. For example, Mexico, as our neighbor, always has a high number of applications annually. And so their wait time, because of the country quotas, is even further back. It's about 22 years right now. So if you were a Mexican national with US citizen parents, you would have to wait 20 years to come to the United States to live with those parents. Now, the other main category of immigration comes from in the employment-based context. There are very specific visa categories, and generally, in order to come here, you have to fall into one of those categories, most of which require some sort of job offers. And the visa bulletin that I mentioned a few minutes ago also applies to the employment-based context. So for some categories, such as Indian nationals, you can see here it's backed up 11 years. So again, thinking about how the labor market actually moves and how employment works, you can imagine that waiting for 11 years for a job offer that is being made to you today might not be a very reasonable way to be able to emigrate to the United States.
So using me as an example again, if I didn't have status or if I was undocumented, what steps would I need to take to fix my status if I was in the United States?
For people inside the United States, there are limited options as well. And again, they might depend on having family members, having an employment offer, or switching to some sort of tourist or education visa or humanitarian application. And so, assuming you're in that F1 category, which is again is an unmarried son or daughter of a U.S. citizen, then you would have to have a lawful entry into the United States. So you would have to have entered using a passport and a visa and be able to demonstrate that lawful entry. You would have had to have maintained lawful status up until the filing of your application for permanent residence. And then again, yes, you have to have an immediately available visa, meaning you can't just be on the waiting list for having that visa, which again can be 20 years or longer, depending on someone's circumstances.
What about people who come to the United States to have a U.S. citizen child and try to take advantage of our immigration laws?
So that's another great question that I think comes up a lot. And we've heard the term anchor baby. It's kind of the slang term for the concept of someone, crossing the border to have a baby that's going to anchor them somehow to the United States. And that is 100% a total myth, because that's not how it works. Having a baby here will not give you very much, really at all. So in terms of the immigration benefits that you get from having a child born here, there are no immediate benefits. And that goes to marriage too. I think a lot of people assume that you marry a US citizen and you're protected from deportation or you get your green card. You have to apply for that, and it's not automatic, it's not immediate, and sometimes it's not even approved at all. So the only thing you could possibly get immediately is if you're in the US for 10 years or longer, and you can demonstrate exceptional and extremely unusual hardship to that US citizen baby, then in immigration court, before an immigration judge, when you're trying to stop your deportation, you might have one option called cancellation of removal. So again, that's very specific circumstances. That's a high burden to show that level of hardship. And you can't request that on your own. That only comes up if you're actively in the process of being deported.
And then does the judge automatically grant it for me?
No. So you would have to go to multiple court appearances. You would have to give testimony. A lot of times, really what the judge is looking to see is medical documentation or psychological documentation showing that for whatever reason your US citizen child or whatever relative you might have that qualifies would suffer in a way that's unique to you and not just the general hardship of family separation. And frankly, those applications are very routinely denied. So it's not automatic. It's not even necessarily more likely than not. It depends on the facts of every single case, and it is not a very straightforward or easy immigration benefit to receive. If the question becomes, is an anchor baby, or as the term is called, ever able to help the parent, the child, when the child is no longer a child, so at age 21, that individual can then apply for their parents as an adult US citizen applying for your parent.
So it seems like all these laws don't make it easy for someone to immigrate the right way to the United States. But aren't immigrants in general a fiscal burden on the US?
So that's another common misconception that we see about immigrants and immigration. And it makes sense that people might think, okay, if immigrants are getting paid under the table in a lot of situations, they're not paying taxes, or I know there's a lot of misinformation about what kind of public benefits immigrants might get. So I want to share some very specific information about Pennsylvania, because in the Drexel's Law Clinic, that's where we are, and that's the state that we're talking about here. So we can go through some very specific information about immigrants in Pennsylvania. So undocumented immigrants in Pennsylvania pay for 418.1 million in federal taxes and 238 million in state and local taxes as of 2018. So a lot of undocumented immigrants do pay wage taxes. They might have work authorization, even if they don't have lawful status, or they might have what's called an ITIN. So even if you don't have a US Social Security number, you can still voluntarily pay taxes by filing for a taxpayer identification number, which many immigrants do. And then beyond that, you have to remember that immigrants are paying sales tax and property tax. They're buying and selling goods. So all of that is contributing to the US economy, and specifically the economy in Pennsylvania. So another really important thing to note, and that I think a lot of people don't realize, but if you sit and think about it, it probably makes a lot of sense. A lot of businesses are created and owned by immigrants as well at all levels. So a lot of Silicon Valley type startups and major corporations have been started by either immigrants or children of immigrants. And then even on the small scale, a lot of different landscaping and construction businesses in Pennsylvania, food stores, small retail stores. Many of the businesses you see every day walking down the streets of Philadelphia or some other cities are going to be immigrant-owned businesses. So specifically in Pennsylvania, immigrant-owned businesses account for 10% of the businesses in Pennsylvania, generating 1.2 billion in business income. So a lot of people might think, oh, immigrants come here to steal jobs, but in reality, a lot of immigrants are here creating jobs and paying taxes, employing US workers, generate a lot of growth and revenue. So that's something that I think a lot of people miss, or, it's not broadcasted in the way that some of the fear mongering catchphrases about immigrants taking jobs or not paying taxes might be. And then to talk a little bit about what immigrants are getting for those benefits, if you don't have US citizenship or lawful permanent resident status, most public benefits are not open to you. So the myth of immigrants receiving food stamps or other benefits, it simply does not happen because you have to meet those threshold requirements typically to get any of those benefits.
But don't they receive free healthcare at hospitals and emergency rooms?
So they're required to be treated at hospitals and emergency rooms, but then they're just like us, they would be required to pay that bill, and it can affect their credit. And they're also many times less likely to be able to get healthcare in most states. And then they're strapped with a very, very large bill without federal funding or insurance help in paying those bills.
Thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me and for answering all of my questions. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with all the voters?
Yes, get out there and vote. Your vote this year in 2020 is more important than it ever has been. It's more important to immigrants and our immigrant community, which is our community here in the United States. There's a lot of personal lives that are at risk and at stake right now in this election. And more broadly, I think our culture and our community is at risk. As we talked about during the interview, immigrants are a huge part of the economy, both in terms of the labor force and economic growth and entrepreneurship in the United States, and starting up new businesses and bringing in kind of that intellectual capacity and that intellectual force to the United States. And really every area of immigration is under threat right now under this administration. So our schools, our culture, our businesses, all of it could change if this administration prevails. And so voting now is really more important than ever.